When people look at me now at level 50 and like, oh, she's so lucky, I'm like, you have no idea.
Welcome back to the Beckie Kullberg Show. Today we have Louise Westra. I hope that's how you say your name, right?
Yeah.
Louise Westra? Okay. And Louise is phenomenal. She's got a really interesting story. I'm going to let her tell you the story, but it really about being in your 40s and overcoming those beliefs around I need to be tired because I'm older or it's just hormones really has debunked all of those beliefs. And I've been sitting back watching you since 2018 was when I met you and seen you even get better and better and better. So welcome to the studio, Louise. What's your secret? What's your secret?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you. What is my secret? I think the secret is that there is no secret.
Welcome to the Beckie Kullberg Show, where we're going to have real, raw, and honest talk about our bodies and their beauty.
I think that women are.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Right. Well, so here's my take on things, Beckie. I think that we're told that we're supposed to show up in a certain way in the world. I know that as a younger woman in my 20s, certainly into my 30s even, I definitely was living that out. And the better that I started to feel emotionally, cognitively, physically, the more realization I had that we've been sold so many lies.
Show up a certain way. What do you mean by that?
So I guess a little bit of a story around my journey with my relationship with myself, my body. I grew up in I'm a 74 baby, so I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and the narrative around at that time was very much that, it certainly here in the UK in the 90s, when I was in my mid-teens, there was a huge push towards a very, very skinny aesthetic. It was actually referred to at one stage as heroin chic. When you are
Heroin chic. I remember that term. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Kate Moss. It's not her fault, but Kate Moss was the sort of main model who embodied that. And as I say, that was nothing to do with her. Although, to be fair, later on she was shown to be a pretty enthusiastic user of cocaine. But that, sort of visual aesthetic, for want of a better term, of, almost skeletal thinness that was sold to me and my peers as a teenager as the height of what we should be aspiring to, to show up as in the world. And then I also remember my first defining memory, or one of my first memories around food, is probably around the age of 9 or 10, eating to a point where I can remember being in the bathroom and feeling so full, so stuffed with food, because I just hadn't known how to stop myself eating. I've had this journey whereby I've had these sort of internal biological factors, and I'll talk more about this, that has to do with some of the genetic influences that I have. So on the one hand, I had this sort of internalized tendency to overeat, and I was learning within the family culture that I grew up in, that food was immensely comforting. We didn't talk about our emotions. We didn't talk about how we were feeling. What we did was we used food to basically stuff those emotions down and or to make ourselves feel better. So there was that going on biologically, there was the cultural and therefore the psychological influence of that, and then there was the wider cultural influences as a young teenage woman. And all those things, of course, they intersect and they create friction. And what that created for me was, alongside some family challenges, was a sense of shame around my relationship with food and therefore my body, because I couldn't meet the external, level of success that was being presented to me. I couldn't, I just wasn't that thin.
I love that level of success, which is such a program.
Right? This idea that as women, or as a young woman, that was the thing that we should be aspiring to. And it's so fascinating because I recently went through some correspondence from the mid-90s. So I was in my late teens, so probably around 19 to 21, 22. Letters to my sister, from my sister, letters to friends, back from friends. And there was so much talk about being on a diet, what we were eating, it was sort of, I can chuckle at it now, and I can extend, myself grace and compassion for who I was and how I operated at that time. But what a waste of time and energy, right? What a complete waste of time and energy. Not to mention the fact that when you are trying to starve yourself, when you are aspiring to basically, be anorexic, essentially was what I aspired to be at one stage, that's your goal as a young woman, and as I say, when you are that depleted, again, from a biological perspective, you aren't eating enough macronutrients, you aren't eating enough micronutrients, you aren't eating enough phyto or plant nutrients, and you are only going to ever be able to feel like absolute crap. I hope it's okay to use that word.
I was hoping you'd use the word rubbish.
Oh, sorry, rubbish. You just can't feel well. So again, being that malnourished, and again, when you've got biological, your own internal genetic, vulnerabilities, which we all have, not necessarily in the way that people realize, and we'll talk more about that. But, again, if you are undernourished, that is then going to mean that those underlying vulnerabilities you have are going to come to the fore earlier than anyone would like. So to give, you and everyone listening an understanding, it got to a point where I was eating so little that I was eating paracetamol, which you guys call, what's the name for a paracetamol? It's a very common medication for headaches.
Advil?
Maybe. Anyway, it's a common over-the-counter, medication. And it just so happened that one of my friends, who had some serious trauma going on in her life, which I wasn't aware of at the time, carried around a large quantity of paracetamol at all times. And she was medicated. She medicated herself for all sorts of reasons with all sorts of different drugs. And basically we used to eat the paracetamol like they were candy to numb the pain of being so malnourished.
Oh my gosh.
That's how bad my relationship was with myself. So when people, and I don't know that I've actually really shared that before, to be honest, probably with one-to-one clients, but not in a more, open way. When people look at me now at level 50 and like, oh, she's so lucky, I'm like, you have no idea, and like I say, I probably should be more open about these things, but to me, it's still quite been a very private journey. And even though if you look at Facebook, you might see me in my underpants.
I know. So let's talk about that journey. You did recently level 250. And you did like, well, you're right. I mean, me looking at your body, your quote unquote before, when you started doing, made some changes physically. For me, I'm looking at your body, I'm like, gosh, she looks great. And then you started making different choices. So I would love to hear about that. And you had, what I noticed, it wasn't, yeah, your body was more tone and it looked different, but your energy, you were standing really tall, very proud. You had this strong structure about you. So what brought that decision to take that journey?
In the around this time last year, I started to think about the fact that I was heading towards level 50. And, you've known me long enough to know that that's how I talk about aging. My husband and I talk about going up the levels. We really want to continue to disrupt the narrative around aging. He is 53, the strongest he's ever been. So I guess to some degree I've been not lagging behind him a little bit, but watching him. And I think at one point I did say to him, look, I felt that the gap between his sort of physical journey and my physical journey was almost so, it felt to me like I was so far away from what he was doing that I couldn't sort of join in with where he was at. I needed to go back to the beginning. I mean, I've always had coaches. I'm a firm believer. I obviously coach my clients as well as being a practitioner and mentor. But I was like, I really need to put aside my ego, right? Because we all have it. Put aside my ego and bring somebody in to view me with fresh eyes and help me build what I refer to as my old lady body. And so I did that. I invested in bringing those, a fresh, if you like, lens. I'm all about curiosity, but I felt like I really needed somebody else's objectivity to come in. And it was so interesting because having had this journey and having done such a lot of work and, personal development on that relationship with myself and with my body and really unpacking that narrative around diet culture, I really felt that I had left behind any like pretty much all of that. And as it transpired, one of the things I learned from July of last year in the first probably like 4 months of working with this coach, and she wasn't like, it wasn't particularly hands-on. It was accountability. And she just, to be fair, she did, she gave me my workouts, but I wasn't working one-to-one with someone in a gym. So I needed to be, extrinsically and intrinsically, I was extrinsically and intrinsically motivated by the whole thing. That I realized that I had been under eating carbohydrates quite significantly. So for years I'd known that I needed to keep my protein high. I probably didn't have it as high as I have had it since and now have it. But what I realized was that I still was harboring some fear around or mistrust of carbohydrates. And I think that dates back to, again, my relationship with overeating. Again, carbohydrates have been very heavily demonized at various points in the time that I've been alive. They're being demonized again, most recently by the carnivore diet. And so that was a really, really profound, very subtle. And this is the thing about when you have a journey with yourself, often the insights that you gather, and I'm sure you know this yourself with your journey and have experienced that they're so profound, but they're very quiet and intimate. They don't have to be these big things that you have to go out there and shout about and look, I did this and I did that. It's, to me, there's such incredible power in learning quietly about myself. And then, sometimes I choose to share elements of it more publicly. And as I say, often I'm sharing most with my one-to-one clients. So it was about, it turned out I didn't expect it to be more about my relationship with food, but it did unpack another level of something that I had sort of, was a blind spot for me. And the other element was physically getting strong, intentionally building strength in my body, because I was very aware that little bit that I was carrying around my middle, right? Because when you see the before and after, you can see it was there. That as a quite a small human, I'm only 5'3", and I'm a fairly small frame as well. And I knew that extra, those few extra inches around my weight, that they were around my middle, it wasn't about my weight as such, it was more about my metabolic health, because I'm a practitioner. So I know too well that it doesn't take too much of that particular type of weight to be impacting how all sorts of different processes in the body, are or are not working in our favor. And again, knowing some of my genetics. So I just want to be clear on this point right now. So when I talk about genetics, I'm talking about a subset of genetics called nutrigenomics. And that is, or those are the glitches, if you like, that all of us have going on in our genetic coding, in the conversations that our genes are having all the time. And in my particular case, I knew that some of my nutrigenomic glitches, they're called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, that my SNPs, my glitches, were becoming compounded. So it was sort of the additional middleweight was partly there because of some of those genes, but also I knew that they had the potential to continue to sort of compound and get and sort of become a bigger and bigger issue. And I know that because I love my parents to death, of course I do, but I've seen that happen in my mother in particular, in terms of now since her 60s, she's really struggled with her weight. When I say she struggled, she's a huge comfort eater, she's a secret eater. She doesn't even know that I know that she hides food in the house, and then goes, and actually, comforts herself, because she's deeply unhappy in some ways. And so food is taking on that role of somebody else will go and drink a bottle of wine, right? She eats chocolate but she eats it to the degree that it is affecting her weight. And as I say, the genes and our choices rub up against one another. And before we know it, we are, somewhere we don't even necessarily realize that we want to be. And that I could see that happening for me. And it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't about the weight per se. It was just that I felt heavier. I was still very energetic. But as you said, now you can see the strength in my structure. I mean, I just love feeling strong. It is so, so empowering. Again, when you look at the research, when you have a little bit of knowledge and you understand what intentionally building muscle at this stage of life does for you, it is one of, if not the most important strategy for longevity. I don't like the term anti-aging, but in terms of aging up the levels, aging well, ensuring that our health span is as long as our lifespan, rather than the health span dropping off in our 60s or 70s and us living another 20 years, getting frailer and weaker, and health outcomes getting poorer and poorer and poorer. I'm not doing that.
Yes, claim it, own it. I heard you say that you're a practitioner, and it's not just like, tell me more about that, because what you do is very, very interesting.
I've been doing this for 20 plus years, right? So anyone who's been involved in their particular professional field for that period of time will usually find that things evolve as they do. So my work is originally I'm what's called a naturopath. I know in parts of the States you have naturopathic doctors, Where I trained in Australia originally, we don't have a naturopathic doctor qualification, so we can't prescribe medications, and we can't, I know in some naturopathic degrees you can do small, some small like surgeries and various things. It does vary from state to state. But essentially, as a naturopath, my role has always been, again, to extend curiosity to what the person in front of me is experiencing. So when a client comes and says, oh, I'm low in energy, I'm a hormonal wreck, I have no emotional regulation with my children or my husband or both, even though I love them all dearly, and I just wake up feeling like, oh God, is this all that life has to offer? And I'm, and I'm like 40 or whatever, 45 or whatever. And I've been to the doctor, often that I've been to the doctor, I've had blood tests, they're all fine, everything's fine. Well, all that means, and thank goodness, is that nothing is actually pathologically wrong. And that's really, really good news. But just because nothing is wrong, it does not mean that everything is working as well as it could be. That's the other end of the spectrum. And what I'll always explain to a client is that, our symptoms, they are messages. They are a gift from our body trying to tell us what has and is going awry so that it can get our attention and hopefully we will come and help. My job is really to determine, where does this individual need support at the biological level? So I call it biological resilience, right? Building resilience in our biology to ensure that the way our cells are working gives us the bandwidth that we want and need to have the most wonderful, richest experience emotionally, cognitive, and physically. The way that I do that, as I say, is through the lens of naturopathy, but also my master's degree is in Western herbal medicine. So I think, if you believe in past lives, I was probably a witch somewhere in a past life. And it then, that balance, again, naturopathy is very evidence-based, despite what some people seem to believe. Yeah, there's a lot of research, but often it's not in English, right? Often it's in... it might be coming out of the Ayurvedic system. It might be coming out of China. It might be coming out of Japan. And we have a tendency often, if something is not readily available to us in our own native language, to just simply dismiss the idea that another culture might have some wisdom to impart to us. And that's something that we have to be really, really careful of, right?
That's an interesting perspective about, if it's not in your native language, it's maybe there's no legitimacy to it, or it can't be correct. Do you think that's common, like worldwide? I feel like that's like such an American way of thinking, to hear someone from the UK say that. Do you think that's a worldwide belief?
I think it's a Caucasian. I think it's quite a Caucasian. We maybe shouldn't get too deep into it, but there has been a tendency through history for white-skinned people to be positioned as the benchmark for everything, and that anything that is different to that is therefore lacking in validity or has reduced validity. And I don't think that should be a contentious thing to say. I think if you again view the world with a lens of curiosity, that was certainly here in the UK, that is very, very clear to me. Living in what is a very multicultural society now, and some of the attitudes here around, people that haven't been born in the UK and don't have the same, colour skin and don't have the same languages,
Okay. We kind of went off there. I was kind of curious about that. It's very interesting.
I think it's important to check our own bias, right?
Yes.
Yeah, my point is really, it's important that we check our own bias, because we all have them. We all have them. As I say, naturopathy it is traditional wisdom, but it is also intersected with evidence-based practice in the best possible way. When I talk about evidence-based practice in the best possible way, I mean research that has not been done for financial gain. Because again, a lot of research is not done for philanthropic purpose. It is not done for the pursuit of the betterment of mankind. It is funded by companies that have a particular agenda. And you've only, again, got to put aside any bias that you may have and look to see how many of those pharmaceutical companies, because that's what I'm talking about, have been fined to the tune of millions, if not billions of pounds and dollars on a regular basis, but they are still in business. So that tells me that model of operating is still successful for them and their shareholders, which should be absolutely, it should just be absolutely deplorable from a human perspective. I remember years ago when I was in my early studies, I know this is a slight aside, but I'll come back to it, reading an account of a research paper that was for a new drug to shrink tumours. And the study was abandoned quite quickly because a number of people died. And of course, from an ethics perspective, that's happening, they have to cut it off. But when they were doing the autopsies, they found that in people, that the tumours had shrunk. So because the success of a drug trial is measured by the end clinical, like the end points that they set, in terms of those clinical endpoints, which is they were looking for the tumour shrinking, the drug could have been said to be successful. Like this is what I mean. Like people, there's a whole world out there that people unfortunately don't understand. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that we all, I would encourage everybody to, as much as possible, be informed about your health, be an advocate of your health to yourself, and understand that at the end of the day, the buck stops with you, right? Because you can ask my opinion as a clinician, you can ask somebody else's opinion as a clinician. You are going to get, probably, depending on, if you come to me and you say, oh, I've got an inflammatory condition in my hand, or, my finger's really swollen and so on, and I'm going to work on systemically, advocating to get that inflammation down in your whole body, whereas a clinician that is more oriented towards, and this is an extreme example, it's not a very good one, so forgive me. If you go to a surgeon and say, what should I do about this finger? Then a surgeon is more likely to say, well, we can do something surgical, right? That's just bias. That's normal clinical bias. But coming back to what we were saying before, the other thing that I spend a lot of time doing with clients now is working in the area of the nutrigenomic area, which is those genetic glitches.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
And one of the reasons that I love, Beckie, I love that area so much is, well, firstly, I can be a bit of a geek, so it sort of fulfills that part of things. But equally, because what I have seen, what I've experienced personally and what I've experienced with my clients over the last several years, is that getting these types of insights often allows us to let go of a layer of shame and guilt around our actions and behaviors and how we can feel about things in a way that nothing else does. So let me explain that a little bit more. So for instance, going back to the example I used around my, overeating. So what I learned through looking at my nutrigenomics, my genetic SNPs, was that I have a number of genes that are geared towards me overeating. So those were very helpful at a certain point in my, for my ancestors to make the most of food when food was available. So, on the one hand, when I'm sharing that with clients, I'm like, look, on the one hand, we can be really, really grateful because it's these genetic glitches that allowed you and the people that came before you to stay alive so that you could have this experience in time and space in this particular, lifetime. On the other hand, it also means, so I have, there's a gene called POMC, POMC, and it's referred to as the Labrador gene because it was initially found in Labradors, and it's actually found in quite a number of different types of dogs as well. But humans have it
to where
too.
They just want to keep eating and not stop?
Exactly right.
Interesting.
If you've ever had a Labrador or a dog that has a similar temperament, it's a higher interest in food. Now, it's not the only gene that we can have that creates this higher interest in food. But if you have a number of different genes that are all predisposing you to be more interested in food, that could just show up when life is really, going well, when you're sleeping well, when you haven't got too many balls in the air, when you haven't got, children, when you haven't got aging parents and, teenagers, young adults in the house. You might not notice that for the first part of your life. But when we have more pressure put upon us, this is when these genes become more expressive in the least helpful of ways. So when we're a bit fatigued, when our children are nagging us over and over and over, when we've got multiple appointments that aren't just our own, but also belong to, other family members, when we are under more pressure at work, all those things, because genes of course don't operate in a vacuum, they place more pressure for those genes to work against us, in inverted commas, to be less helpful. So then we find ourselves looking around for food. So previously we might have just been like, well, I'm a foodie, I enjoy food, right? But then when these other factors sort of become more prevalent, that starts to mean that we find ourselves, falling into a bag of crisps at night, followed by a chocolate bar, followed by some cheese and crackers. Like for me, that was a big thing, right? So through COVID, we were very active. That's when my sort of, middle section started to get bigger. We were very active. But I also started to comfort eat more than I probably had in my life. So the more I did it, because again, my Labrador gene and the other genes that mean I'm predisposed to enjoy creamy foods and just to love food, also I've got a reduced sensitivity or predisposition to a reduced sensitivity to leptin. So for those that don't know, leptin is about satiety. It's about feeling full. So what that means is that once I start eating and those Labrador genes and other genes that intersect all kick in, I don't then have an off switch. I don't have the same off switch that somebody else just goes, oh, well, I'm nicely full now, so I'm just going to stop. I just want to keep eating, and I want to keep eating even though sometimes I know that I'm full. So even tonight, right, I had my dinner with my our youngest because my husband and our eldest were out at an activity. So there was a dinner. I decided that I wanted to be sort of on point with my macros today, so I chose a particular dinner, but I was doing a pasta dish, with a meat sauce and everything for my husband and son because they love that. I ate my dinner. I mean, it was a generous portion. It was like 140 grams of chicken breast, lean chicken breast with no skin. It was a good sized baked potato. There was lots of green leafy vegetables on there. There was radishes, there was cucumbers, there was feta cheese. Like it was a mountain of food. And I enjoyed it, and I wasn't too full at the end, but I was full. And then, because their dinner was still cooking, I could have easily, if I'd been more sleep deprived, if I would have had to have intentionally prevented myself from going and doing what I call the BLTs, right? The bites, the licks, and the tastes. So then I could kid myself that I hadn't been eating a second dinner, because I'm just having a taste here and a bite there and a lick there. And that's sort of how it works for me. So hence, I have a cup of tea. I do have some ice cream lined up for later, because that's how I manage it. I actually, I plan out my food now, which interestingly, again, going back to my journey starting last year, was one of the things that I had really shied away from for a long, long time, because I'd been so restrictive when I was younger with food and so cruel to myself. I really felt that tracking my food might trigger that in terms of feeling really, really restricted. But actually, it has given me a level of freedom with food that I just never imagined it could do.
I have so many questions. Okay, first off, and I bet anyone listening to this, they're like, how do I find out if I have the Labrador gene? So, like, how do you know? Did you get tested?
Right.
Like, how do you know if you have the Labrador gene?
Yeah, so I work with 150 different of SNPs, these glitches, over 11 different profiles, because if you try to present all the information that's available to somebody in one go, it would be overwhelming, right? So there's a profile called the metabolics profile that I work with that has, it's a brilliant profile actually, because it covers everything from satiety, so appetite, satiety, so it looks at ghrelin, it looks at leptin, it looks at your interest in food with the POMC and other genes in there that I mentioned. It also looks at how you metabolize carbohydrates versus fat. So if you're likely to take fats preferentially into your cells and leave carbohydrates in the blood for too long, which can be a predisposing factor for type 2 diabetes. And also, if you've got too many fats going into your cells preferentially, that could also, be problematic because it can slow you down. And you also get to see information like, genetically, how you're doing with creating, doing things like keeping inflammation under control in your mitochondria, because one of the things, again, as we age up the levels, if we're aging well, then we're going to continue to have mitochondria that are really, really functional. And again, for anyone who's not sure, your mitochondria are like the engines of your cells. And we want to make sure that they're not getting sort of clogged up, people take their car in, right? And they get their car serviced and they get the engine, and the fuel tank sort of cleaned out and all that stuff. That's the type of information we can get to understand whether your mitochondria might be down regulating your energy production, and what we can do about any and all of those things. So that was a big piece for me in terms of lifting off the shame of, oh my God, I'm just, sort of, not that I've said this to myself for years, but when I was younger, what's wrong with you? You're so greedy, like, you just can't stop eating, like you're, just sort of self-disgust, again, because of what I was seeing outside, and never having conversations with, my parents at that time. I think generationally, none of my friends had conversations with their parents about their relationships with food, or, I saw my mother, I remember my mother one day collapsing over the toilet because she'd gone on a diet that I think, probably looking back, was probably only about 1,200 calories. And that's just not enough. And yet women are still doing that today, thinking that that's the way forward.
That's that magic number, 1,200 calories. And so when you meet with clients, do you do the metabolic profile? Is that part of your process? Or is this something that you did with the coach?
No. So it's what I do. Okay. Yeah, it's what I do.
How interesting.
So I was able to tell my coach, hey, listen, I just need you to know, and not that she was very sensible, not that she would have, restricted me to 1,200 calories, but I was able to say from the get-go, listen, I know that I'm going to have to go into a calorie deficit. Like I know that, and then we reverse diet. I don't really like the term, but that's what you're doing, is you're building actually up more capacity to consume more food. So that now is, because I've got those Labrador genes, I'm like, one of my things about building more strength, more lean muscle, is that I get to eat more. I get to enjoy the food that I love. I get to eat more of it, Becky. Whereas, I spent so much of my life trying not to eat, and now I'm like, I just want to see how much I can eat.
I love that. I love that. And
so, sorry, so I didn't answer your question. So yes, so what happens is my clients, I've got a lab that I partner with. I've been very selective. There's some really, there are some DNA labs out there that you definitely don't want to invest with, in my opinion. So my clients get a kit. They swab their mouths because that's where you get the DNA from, just in the mucous membranes of the mouth. So it's really, a tiny little bit intrusive, but not invasive, like, needing to take bloods or anything like that. And then it goes back to the lab, and the data is anonymized, and then the genes are coded.
do you take clients in the United States?
I do. We send samples all over the world. There's a couple of pockets that there's a strange rule, I think, in Spain, whereby we can't get DNA from people in Spain, but generally speaking, they go all over, all over the world.
Okay, interesting.
Because the DNA is stable for a while, right? Glitches.
Are those glitches is that how do you find those through that DNA, or how do you know about the glitches?
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. So when the genetic coding is done, then you get to see what variation. So that's what the polymorphism is. It's a variant on the gene. So you get to see if you've got, what type of, whether you've got the sort of norm, if you like, which is the wild type, or whether or not you've got a deviation from that. And that deviation, that glitch, will mean that your gene has a tendency to either upregulate. So in the case of the POMC Labrador gene, it upregulates appetite, right? In the case of a different gene, it might downregulate. So for instance, it might you could have a SNP, a glitch, that downregulates your ability to metabolize estrogen in a healthy way. So that could leave you predisposed to more severe, like, premenstrual issues. It can, again, intersect with other factors and, leave you at risk of metabolizing into less helpful forms of estrogen that are potentially more problematic if we're not getting them out of the body. So, and whether the gene variant makes things work faster, if you like, or amplifies them, or makes things slower, downregulates them, has to be put into context, because in some genes, things working better or faster is helpful. In other situations, it's not. And the same with the downregulation. So it really does depend.
And with these glitches, how do you treat people? What do you do with them?
Yeah, so it really depends. And my work is quite nuanced. I don't, whilst, there are a lot of really good sort of general recommendations that we can, all take on board when it comes to health, like, at least doing a 20-minute walk, once a day, or getting in our, 10,000 steps, drinking our water, not smoking, getting good sleep. Like, all those things are fine as general recommendations, but when it comes to these things, we have to apply nuance. So for instance, if I have a client who comes to me and we find that, let's say we look at their nervous system because they're stressed out, they're anxious, they're overwhelmed, they're not sleeping. We look at their nervous system, variants, their glitches there, and we find that they have an increased sensitivity to adrenaline, right, on their receptors. So that can be a really good thing. Again, when everything else is going well, that means that they are more inclined to get stuff done. But that can go too far, and if they can't switch off because they've got another genetic variant, that means it's hard for them to access something called GABA, which is our off switch, then what experience has taught me is that for the vast majority of people, the best thing I can do is to interrupt that narrative for them internally, that what I call their biological narrative of, just keeping on, can't switch off, just can't stop, And I do that using evidence-based herbal medicine often, and other very judiciously chosen nutraceuticals. So again, for example, the adrenaline receptor that I mentioned, if that is overexpressing itself, right? If it is leaving us feeling stressed out, then there are herbs that have been shown, again in research, to be able to just sort of calm that down. It's like your best friend turning up and going, hey, it's all going to be okay. Let's make a cup of tea. Let's take a breath. Let's go for a little walk in the fresh air. But we're doing that biologically, and as I say, disrupting what I call the internal narrative. And then once we've done that and everything has calmed down and they're not feeling so anxious and overwhelmed, then we can start to unpack some of the external factors that have maybe got them to that point. So for instance, a common theme with women is people pleasing, is confusing obligations with commitments. Obligations are usually external things to others. If we have too many obligations externally, that usually means we don't have enough time, space, and energy for a commitment to ourselves. It could be about bringing it back to our core values and making sure that we've got a framework to make decisions about those obligations from that framework, so that we can be a little bit more grounded in our decision making and feel good about acting in our own interests. It could be learning and coaching them and supporting them to say no to a particular person in their life, or people who have come to, treat them in a certain way, and teaching them to treat them in a different way, which can be incredibly challenging. Relationships are often the hardest part of life. Again, if I can down regulate an excessively responding nervous system to help them access the parasympathetic, down regulate their vagal tone so they can relax more and switch off, then what I know after more than 20 years of doing this work is that, time expands, energy expands. And then I often don't need to say, oh, well, this is what needs to happen next. My client is often saying, right, I'm ready for this now. Like, can you help me? What can I be doing, to put together, say, some easy meals midweek, because I'm ready to look at, getting some of that happening at home now, rather than grabbing stuff on the way home from work to just feed everyone and get it done.
I'm like, okay, Louise, sign me up. I'm like ready. It's funny. I didn't plan. I wanted to hear about your practice because I'm curious about it and I don't really know. And I want to hear your story and your journey and everything. But your practice is so fascinating, especially since you've been doing it for 20 years. You're so passionate about it, and clearly you're successful at it and really, really knowledgeable. And you live it. That's what's great, is it's not like you're just teaching it and not living it. You're living it.
Yeah, I just don't think, Beckie, that for me, that incongruency, I actually had probably what, looking back, is a really good experience, whereby I worked in a health food store during my training as a naturopath. And the people who owned the health food store, what they said to people coming into the health food store and the advice that they dispense, both from a nutritional perspective and in terms of how they sort of interacted with us as their staff, it was so incongruent that I remember thinking, wow, these guys are such hypocrites. I really need to make sure that if I'm going to be, a decent practitioner, if I'm going to really help people, then I need to make sure that I'm sort of grounded in that, you really can live like this, and not in, and I've had a huge journey with perfectionism, huge journey, not to be perfect, although I would suggest that that's another piece of my puzzle that I'm still unpacking, to show that it's achievable, right? It's achievable to live a healthy lifestyle without it feeling like it's miserable and restrictive. And I think so many women, again, because they've had experiences around food and dieting and trying to be thin that have been so horrible and have felt so constrained and restricted and just, as I say, awful, miserable emotionally, miserable physically, that they've conflated that with what being healthy would mean. And what I can say is that, you know, the better that I feel in my physiology, in my biology, the more bandwidth I have emotionally, the more bandwidth I have cognitively, the more bandwidth I have to build strength. And you know, it's building strength is not actually easy. Do you remember, were you ever told, I was told so many times when I was younger, well, you don't want to, you know, don't do too heavy weights because you'll get bulky. I'm like,
yes,
I want to be bulky now, like not bulky, but you know, I want to be strong now, and I'm having to work so hard, right? I'm having to eat so intentionally, which, as I say, I just actually love doing. And I think, again, one of the things that has come to me in the last couple of years is this idea that, you know, we had this idea that we want freedom. A lot of us we really value freedom very, very highly, both as business people, that's why we're self-employed, and in our lives. And when we felt so restricted at different times in our lives with food and nutrition and sort of health, this idea that putting frameworks in place, like I had that self-limiting belief that I shouldn't track my food because it was going to be restrictive, when in actual fact, having a framework, having a structure, having some actual, having a framework has actually been the most liberating thing, and it has led me to having so much more freedom around food than I ever knew was possible. I didn't even know what I was missing before.
Wow.
That's why I'm not saying it's for everyone, because like I say, my approach to all my clients is it depends. What is right for one person is not right for another. But I'm always about, well, let's explore. Let's think about why is that challenging you so much? Why are you avoiding it? Because so often, you know, the magic that we're looking for is in the exact thing that we're avoiding.
Ooh, say that again.
The magic that we're looking for is often in the exact thing that we're avoiding. And, you know, I could talk to you all day. I could talk about, you know, the all or nothing mindset, which I see is so prevalent. This week I had with one of my clients, you know, I got her to do some blue sky vision work around what she wants life to look like. And one of the things that she wanted to wake up and do was 20 minutes of yoga. She has 2 small children. You know, they are aged like 4 and 6. The chances of her getting up in the morning and doing 20 minutes of yoga are what the Australians would say none and Buckleys. Like there's nay chance, as they would say here in Scotland.
None and Buckley.
Yeah, none and Buckleys.
Okay.
You know, well, what we need to start with is 2 salutations to the sun. And she's like, but, and I was like, okay, but here's the thing. It's either going to be you do nothing, because you've already told me that you just don't see how you could get 20 minutes in, even though that's what you want for yourself. You can't do it now, but that doesn't mean that we can't carve out 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes to do a couple of sun salutations to create the space and then build. And this is the thing that people are missing so much, and you see it time and time again, don't you, with New Year's resolutions, is that it's trying to do too much all at once, when actually successful habit change means going away from the ladder on the wall that has the rungs that are so far apart that you're sort of like clinging on for dear life, trying to keep it going, when you actually need to walk to the other ladder, which is where the rungs are this far apart, where you can step up quite easily, look around and go, okay, it feels okay here, all right, I'm safe here. Often we have to create psychological safety for us around changing our patterns of behavior as well, right? And then step up to the next rung, which is maybe in, next month, she might be doing 4 salutations to the sun. But time and time again, I see people thinking that, consistency has to be something that is done in a specific way, and it's done perfectly, and it's done all the time, and if I don't do it like that, I'm failing, and it's too hard. And actually, being healthy is rubbish. It is too hard.
Yeah. Well, like you said, the all or nothing mindset. It's like, no, let's see what you can do and what that 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and make it work. It doesn't have to look a certain way. This is so much good stuff. I'm so glad we decided to wing it. What else do you want to share? You are a plethora of knowledge, Louise. What else do you want to share?
Well, I guess if I've got carte blanche to say anything, I would counsel anyone listening to understand that if they are dealing with significant and or consistent hormonal issues, whether they are pre-perimenopause, whether they are perimenopausal, please, I implore you to give yourself the gift of, if at all possible, and I recognize again there's immense privilege in being able to do this, of working with someone who will help you to learn more about your hormones in a way that is, really accessible, which actually not all practitioners are very good at, to be fair. I'm just laughing at myself, Becky, because I'm working currently with someone on putting together actually a hormonal package, and he's just brilliant. He's a real find. And he keeps saying to me, what you've got to remember, Louise, is that it's your job to make it accessible. It's not their job to learn your language. It's your job to make it accessible, which I've known intellectually for a long time, but for some reason it's really landing, and he's just such a lovely person and a joy to work with, so that's nice. But yeah, I would really, really implore you to advocate for yourself, to find somebody who you can collaborate with. Don't hand your power over. Again, as women, I've got, so many female clients who are, handling a lot of responsibility, both professionally, both personally, and that does make it understandable then at times why when we then are talking about ourselves, we often sort of hand our power over. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting. My first thought when I'm sick is always, could somebody please come and, take care of this, because I'm, I just want to feel better. And then I remember that ultimately I'm the custodian of this body, this incredible vehicle. I'm the custodian. What a gift. I guess I'm urging you to really think about this vehicle as such an incredible gift. I mean, it's stardust, right? We just have such incredible possibilities with these bodies, and it makes me so sad, Becky, that so many women settle for mediocrity. And I don't mean that with any judgment at all. I'm sure you can feel that, and anyone who's been listening, I'm sure will understand that it's not about feeling bad. It's just really understanding that we're sort of conditioned to accept that, well, we're told as young women, well, periods, they're horrible, they're horrific. And when we look around and we speak to our peers and our mothers and our aunts, and they're all like, oh yeah, well, that's why it's called the curse, it's awful. And some women do suffer dreadfully. But again, these are messages from our body trying to tell us that all is not well. And if we can find somebody who can sort of, somebody once referred to me as the body whisperer, who can listen to the messages and then, knows how to whisper gently, how to give the right conversation, say the right things. And I do it predominantly, as I said, with herbal medicine, because that's my great passion. To whisper a different story, to tell a different story to our biology, so that our hormones are really working in our favor, and allowing us, as I say, that richest and fullest of experiences on every single level.
Yeah. So I'm curious with back to the Labrador gene, because that's like rattling around in my head now. The way I heard you describe it is this new narrative, which is food noise. That food noise that's always there. You know, you're always wanting to eat, and you're always thinking about food, which I've had all my life. And people are talking about the weight loss medication that's so popular right now, Ozempic and all of those.
Ozempic,
and the theme that I'm hearing with people that are using them, they're saying that food noise is gone. And so I'm curious, like, I see it helping a lot of people, and I think that's really wonderful. And in using that, and what's your experience? Is it like overriding that Labrador gene, or is it interfering, or what's your experience with that?
I know Ozempic is being used a lot in the US. It's not, I mean, it's not that I don't know anyone that's used it. It's not that I don't know people who haven't, I know people who've used it here in the UK, but I don't think we have the same, we haven't got the same...
You can just say it, overweight problem.
Well, we do though. I mean, we're definitely up there. The Australians are also up there. So we do definitely have those problems. But at the moment, I haven't had any clients that I'm working with. As I say, I've had one particular friend who used it, and actually, interestingly, her appetite switched off so much that she almost became sort of, like she was barely eating at all. And actually, one of her children had a psychological impact for one of her children, because they noticed how little their mother was eating, and they started to also stop eating. And they ended up taking that child to, if it wasn't a psychiatrist, definitely to a psychologist for a period of time. So I think, we've got to be aware of, again, as adults, and I agree with you. I think for some people that drug will be an absolute game changer. In the longer run, there's still a question over whether or not, as with many medications, there won't be a longer term cost, because with most medications, they are nutrient analogues. And so what that means is that the drugs, on every cell of the body, we have receptors. We have receptors for different nutrients. Every cell of the body has receptors for vitamin D, for instance. And so when drugs come along and they take up space on those receptors, that means that some of our nutrients can't do that. So over time, a lot of drugs actually cause problems in the body because they lead to low level nutrient depletion, nutrient deficiencies. So I don't think we know long term yet whether the initial benefits will still stand up to longer term use. And the other thing is that unless someone is also doing the work around their relationship with food, and I've seen this with a number of clients, and again, people that I've known who've had, gastric interventions, bypasses and things, that unless they address their relationship with food, most of the people that I've seen that have had some kind of gastric, band or bypass, have hit a plateau, and certainly with the band, many of them start cheating. So you can gradually put more into the stomach and sort of expand it. And it's you still, to my mind, you still got to do the work, right? Because you could take Ozempic, you could eat less, but if the quality of the food that you're eating is still really, really poor, you are still going to end up with metabolic issues, because instead of being obese or morbidly obese, you'll end up being skinny fat.
Right. It's Thin on the outside and fat on the
health
inside.
outcomes for being skinny, right, all around the tissues, that's not necessarily going to be a better long-term outcome. So I think it can, at this stage, I think, we can say that it could be helpful for, there's going to be a subset of people that it probably will work, and they'll be on it for a short term and they'll do really, really well. But for the vast majority, unless you also address the other factors in your lifestyle that are influencing your food choices, again, if we don't build lean muscle, we're going to end up sarcopenic anyway, and that's, you're going to end up with a similar metabolic outcome, but you're just not obese or morbidly obese.
Yeah, I had weight loss surgery in 2016. Yeah, I did.
Did you?
I had, and for me, and so it's like all the things are lining up now, because I never felt satisfied with food, and I was treated for an eating disorder long before I had my weight loss surgery. I fell in love with my body at its highest weight, and so the weight loss surgery just felt like the natural progression. It wasn't to fix anything. It was more to reduce what went into my body. And now I'm at this stage where what you're saying is just making so much sense for me, because and I hear people talk about the food noise. The food noise is so loud for me right now. And I'm really get to reestablish or create a new relationship with food, because I think that what you're saying is very true around the fear of carbohydrates. My body thrives in high protein and low carbohydrates, and I work out a lot. Yeah. I hike a lot, so I need that extra fuel to keep me going. So it's making those adjustments and allowing myself to go, okay, this is the way I get to eat now. In my 50s is a whole new chapter.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, there are some days where, I would prefer to, I think to myself, I would prefer to not be thinking about food so much right now, okay? Like, I do have those moments. But on the other hand, when that is in balance, as I say, I'm very fortunate, obviously, but I feel like I have such an incredibly, despite that, I feel like I have such an incredibly healthy relationship with food that sometimes now, if I do choose to eat more, I don't eat, whereas I used to eat, as I say, to a point where I would be like, oh my God, I am so full. I don't ever eat to that point anymore. So I might, and this is where, as I say, the sort of the being really clear on what I need from a macronutrient perspective with my carbs, my protein, and my fats. And like you, I really am very intentional about high protein. So I currently eat about 3 grams of protein per kilo of my body weight. So I average between, very occasionally it's 120 grams a day, but it's usually around up between 140 and 160 grams a day, right? But I also know that, and again, with the intersection of my genes for my nervous system, that I really, from a mood perspective, need those carbohydrates for my serotonin, right? So to feel good, carbohydrates, and this is the thing that although we technically don't need carbohydrates, right? This is why people can survive on keto and whatnot. Most of us feel better for them. So I'm really, again, now that I know how many carbohydrates I need, I'm really intentional, and I always have been, like, because I love food. And I've been, again, very fortunate because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of fresh food available. Now, we did have quite a lot of convenience food because it was the 70s and 80s where, again, organisations are bringing in a lot of frozen food in the UK, and, mums for the first time were able to just pull something out of a freezer instead of having to slave over a stove all day and, all that stuff. But I had a lot of food, a lot of fresh food, and that's really stuck with me. So I eat a lot of volume. If you saw how much food I eat, people are just like, when people meet me for the first time, if we go out for dinner, and they're just like, wow, I can't believe how much food you're eating. But if you look at how my plate is made up, a lot of that volume is vegetable based. So it's got the volume, it's got the fiber, so it helps me to feel full. I'm also very intentional about chewing my food, and I try my absolute hardest, Becky, as often as possible not to eat on the run. Because if I eat on the run, on the hoof, then it's almost like it just doesn't get registered. Yeah, I just do not register it. Like, it's like it didn't happen, right?
Yes. No, I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah, I know you do. And then, as I say, in the evening, my strategy is, because I know what I'm going to eat and I'm largely tracking it, I give myself a day off here and there. When we go on holiday, we went away for 3 weeks over Christmas and New Year. I didn't track at all. But I had done so much work that I was pretty confident that I knew what I was going to be doing. And also we were walking a lot, and I was working out more than I do when I'm, working. So, I make sure that I have foods that I enjoy so that I don't fall into this sort of mindset of deprivation or of lack around food. Oh, I can't have any crisps, or oh, I can't have ice cream. Oh, I can't have chocolate. I've never really said those things to myself for a long time, but I still think there was an element of that. So, yesterday in the evening, my favorite crisps, in fact, the only crisps I really eat, because I'm all about, it's sort of got to be worth it, I've got to love it, are paprika flavored crisps. Do you like paprika flavored crisps?
I don't even, so crisps, what are crisps?
Chips.
Okay. Oh, I love chips. Yeah, and paprika flavor sounds delicious.
Potato chips. Right, yeah, so oh my goodness, smoked paprika flavour crisps. So my husband had bought some, and I discovered that they were in the cupboard. So last night in the evening, I was like, we got crisps. I could eat the crisps. And then I was like, well, no, I don't need to eat the crisps because I'm going to have some for lunch tomorrow. And I just put it into my plan for today. And I had an amount of crisps that I was happy with, that fitted into my macros, along with, a really big, juicy, filled cheese and ham, sorry if there's any vegetarians, cheese and ham roll with, some watercress and radishes and cucumber, because, as I say, I need to have the bulk to appease, I need to feel that with my leptin, I need to make an active sort of stand to be full, to make sure that signaling is you are physically full. Not to the point of, oh my God, I'm stuffed and now I need to roll around, but just to I know I've eaten. And my leptin goes, I know you've eaten. Okay, I'm good. We're good here. You can move on.
Yeah. So what's next for you, Louise? What's the next chapter in this level 50?
Yeah, the next chapter, actually, that's a whole other podcast, Becky. The next chapter is actually, we are leaving the UK. We were away, or I was in Australia for 14 years. I've been back in the UK for 12, coming up to 13 years. We are actually moving to a place called Vanuatu in the Pacific. We're moving to an off-grid island.
Wow.
And we're going to be living on an acre of waterfront, an acre of waterfront land.
That is quite the change.
It is. But again, for me, part of it is demonstrating that you can create and live your own version of success. I'm not suggesting for a minute that what I'm doing is going to be many other people's version of success. But again, I really want women to know that at level 50, at this point in time, you don't need to settle. If there's something that you always wanted for yourself, or, this blue sky vision that you've had for yourself, you can make it happen. It might not happen in exactly the way, if you told me 20 years, this is what I'd be doing, I would have been like, really? No, I don't think so. But it's evolved to basically hit all my important success markers around what I value, how I want to live my day-to-day life, how I want to show my my husband and I want to demonstrate to our children a different set of priorities in a different culture.
Yeah. How exciting. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What's
one
more message? One message that you want women to walk away from this podcast with?
I mean, I want you to know that I get it. I know that, there's a very real juggle struggle for the vast majority of women. At the same time, I also want you to remember that, this is not a rehearsal. This is the real deal. And even if, we do come around and there is another lifetime for all of us, who knows, at the end of the day, this is our shot. So I'd encourage you to take your shot. And, that shot, to me, the foundation of it all is having the best possible experience emotionally, cognitively, physically, because then you can live out anything that you want into creation.
How can people get a hold of you? How can they, if people were like, wow, this Louise, I really want to check in with her and have the metabolic profile done and get everything in line, how would they get a hold of you?
So my website is louisewestra.com.
Okay. I'll put all the links down below so that people can just easily go right there. All right. Thank you so much, Louise. It's been so fun.
Thank you.
I just feel like I got to know you a little bit better. And
it was lovely to talk to you.
I have even more awe